In the Realms of Mediumship by Chico Francisco Candido Xavier and inspired by the Spirit Andre Luis. Chapter 28, Physical Effects. It was 8 p.m. Earth time when we entered a small apartment where materialization phenomena would be performed. Ilario and I didn't want to finish our week of study without following some work of this sort in the company of the assistant. On another occasion, we had observed this type of experience and had recorded our impressions. However, Alice's teachings were always instructive and valuable because of their moral foundations, so I was looking forward to hearing him explain the physical phenomena that we proposed to study. The place set up for the work consisted of 2 rooms, a living room connected to a small bedroom. The bedroom, turned into a study, accommodated the medium, still a young man, while 14 apparently well-intentioned individuals were gathered in the living room. 2 of them were ailing women and the main reason for the meeting, since they wished to garner the friendly assistance of materialized spirits. Pointing to them, the assistant spoke in a serious tone of voice. "I brought you here to help the sick. There are many attempts at materializing forces from our plane, but with few exceptions. Most of them are developed on foundations that are marked by the regrettable approaches of our incarnate brothers and sisters. At present, we see helping the sick as the only justification for an endeavor of this type, in addition to rare, essentially respectable and worthy experiments performed by the scientific world for the benefit of humankind. We would like to have prolonged the explanation, but various workers were coming and going, implying that that evening's work was about to start. The cleansing of the environment was underway. The work required careful preparation. According to our previous experiences, delicate instruments for the emission of healing rays were being placed in the room, while the ionization of the environment was effectuated with bactericidal devices. As usually, some of the incarnates had not taken their responsibilities seriously and had brought with them toxic emanations arising from the abuse of nicotine, meat, and alcohol, in addition to thought forms that were unsuitable for the work to be carried out. Attentive to the study, Alice recommended that we focus our attention on the medium's room. We obeyed. It was bustling with activity. Displaying great discipline, dozens of well-directed spirits were busy with the preparatory efforts. The medium had already received effective aid in his organic field. The digestive, circulatory, and visceral systems had been stabilized. We will forego a more detailed description. As far as we were able, materialization has already deserved our meticulous examination concerning the substances, associations, resources, and activities on the spirit plane. This time, we were interested in mediumship per se. We were trying to analyze its behavior and its relations with regard to environment and people. For that reason, as far as we could tell, there was no better occasion than this one, where we would have the sure collaboration of a competent and dedicated friend like the assistant. Once the lights were turned off and an opening prayer was said, the group, as usual, began singing some evangelical hymns to stabilize the vibrations in the room. Discarnate co-workers extracted energies from persons and objects in the living room, as well as from nature outside. These energies were combined with elements from our sphere to turn the medium's room into an invaluable complex laboratory. As a result of the magnetic action by the spirit guides responsible for the task, the medium left his body in such a perfect way that the act looked to me like discarnation itself, because his physical body lay on the bed abandoned and inert, as if it were a cocoon of flesh. Under the control of technicians from our plane, it began to expel ectoplasm. This substance, a flexible paste much like a viscous semi-liquid jelly, came out through every pore, and most abundantly through the natural orifices, particularly the mouth, nose, and ears. A large amount also came from the chest area and extremities of the fingers. The ectoplasm, characterized by a unique, indescribable smell, flowed in reptilian movements to accumulate on the lower part of the medium's body, where it resembled a large, living, and tremulous protoplasmic mass. Spirit workers lent their loving assistance to the medium, separated from his physical body, as if he were a patient or a child. Alice kindly explained. The ectoplasm per se is as closely associated with the medium's thoughts as the energies of the developing fetus are connected to its mother's mind. Consequently, every precaution is being taken to assist him. Ilario had been listening respectfully and asked, "Is such a precaution due to the possibility of an inappropriate intervention by the medium in the procedures?" "Exactly," Alice continued. "If we could count on a better education of the medium, we would certainly have less to worry about because he himself would collaborate with us, freeing us from concerns and any possible setbacks. For the materialization of individuals and objects from our plane to be more complete, it would demand a more secure dematerialization of the medium and the incarnate fellow spirits that assist him. This is because, no matter how much we devote ourselves to endeavors of this sort, we still depend on the cooperation of our incarnate friends. It is much like water, which, no matter how pure it may be, still depends on the good or bad condition of the channel through which it flows. That would seem to imply that the medium's thought can influence materialized forms, even when such forms are under the strict control of workers from our realm." "Yes," confirmed the assistant. "Even if the medium cannot control such forms completely, he can interfere with their formation and projection, thereby jeopardizing the effort. Hence, the need for complete absence of personal interest on the part of all who devote themselves to such work." Although satisfied, Ilario continued his line of thought. "That being the case, the faculties of materialization do not entail any sort of privilege for those who have them." "By no means." And after a brief pause, "In its literal sense, the very word materialization does not encourage any interpretation that would imply disaccord with the truth. To materialize means to embody. Thus, since mediumship does not imply sublimation, but a means of serving, and furthermore, that death does not immediately purify the impure, how can we attribute sanctity to incarnate mediums, or to those who communicate through them from the beyond, due to the simple fact that they mold passing forms between both planes? Then, this materializing force—" My companion didn't finish. Alice picked up on his thought and cut him short. "This materializing force is like other forces that are manipulated in our tasks of interchange. It is independent of the character and moral quality of those who possess it, and consists of emanations from the psychophysical world, of which cytoplasm is one of the sources of origin. In a few rare individuals, we find this energy in a higher percentage of exteriorization, but we know that it will be more abundant and accessible in the future, when the human community reaches a higher degree of spiritual maturity. So, until then, we utilize such possibilities as someone who makes the most of an unripe fruit in special circumstances in life, experiencing 1,000 unpleasant surprises as we collect it. In endeavors such as this one, we are not only subject to certain undesirable mediumistic interferences, but also to unedifying influences from our incarnate friends who are frankly inapt for work of this type." Ilario was listening attentively to the lesson and asked further, "Let's say that the medium has dishonorable interests, whether in matters of turbulent affections, excessive ambition, or personal points of view in the various areas of common passions." After thinking for a moment, he asked, "In that situation, could he or she influence these phenomena?" "Without any doubt, either consciously or unconsciously." "And the other participants of the group, if imbued with malevolent purposes, could they interfere?" "Most certainly." "Then, why should we subject ourselves to such incapable factors?" The assistant's eyes shone expressively. Patting my colleague on the back, he said sensibly, "Don't say incapable factors. Let's say incipient factors. We can symbolize necessity as a parching thirst, and imperfect or poorly conducted mediumship as unclean water. At the lack of pure water, we can't hesitate. We utilize it in the condition we find it. And then what? We are patient with the spring, cleansing its polluted current little by little. Sublimated mediumship, through instruments that are worthy and conscientious of their mandate, is something eternal and divine that humankind is constructing. This is not the work of haste. Improvisation is not a foundation for sanctuaries of wisdom and love that are built to last." My colleague and I smiled, enchanted with his understanding and tolerance. In the room, a large mass of milky silvery ectoplasm accumulated in abundance, in which a few dark grayish strands could be seen. Technicians from our plane were carefully manipulating it. Alice surmised the operation and explained. That is the light, pliable material we need for the materialization. We can divide it into 3 essential elements. A fluids, representing the superior and subtle forces from our sphere. B fluids, defining the resources of the medium and the incarnates assisting him. And C fluids, made up of energies taken from nature. A fluids can be the purest and C fluids can be the most pliable. However, B fluids, originated by the actuation of incarnates and the medium in particular, are capable of spoiling our noblest plans. In extremely rare circles, where the elements of A fluids receive full cooperation from the energies of B fluids, materializations of a high order assume the finest characteristics to display the sublimity of the phenomena. However, where B fluids predominate, our participation is considerably reduced, since our greatest possibilities will start to be channeled at the level of the less evolved forces from our plane. These forces are in tune with the potentialities of incarnate brothers and sisters and can take over their resources, invading their field of action and steering their psychic experiences towards regrettable disasters. The explanation could not be clearer. We were about to continue the discussion, but Garces, one of the Endeavor's spirit technicians, approached us to ask for Aulus's magnetic assistance. The fluidic atmosphere in the room had become too dense. The small experimental jets of ectoplasmic force projected into the living room were returning to the medium's room with a high level of toxins of various kinds. The 14 people in the living room were 14 types of different whims. Not one of them had enough understanding of the efforts demanded from the spirit world, and instead of helping the medium, each person was overloading him with absurd requests. Consequently, he didn't have enough serenity. He was like a rare animal poked with arrows. Such were the improper thoughts shot in his direction. We won't be able to produce a materialization of the highest order, said the assistant, somewhat worried. Not in the least, informed Garces, disappointed. The medium will remain out of his body, incorporating our nurse in order to assist the ill sisters. Nothing more. We don't have the cooperation we need. Aldous responded to the request and assisted with the magnetic transfer of a certain amount of energies from the medium's physical body to his paraspiritual body, which became highly reanimated. The body of dense matter on the bed fell into deep prostration, but the medium, in his perispirit, displayed greater vitality and greater lucidity. Once the spirit workers enveloped him in a large ectoplasmic robe, the nurse joined him to guide his movements. In spite of being outside his corporeal body, the medium was controlled by the nurse like a psychophonic medium. He was set apart only by his peculiar garment, structured with ectoplasmic materials crucial for his presence in the room, bombarded by perturbed and disquieting thoughts. Watching him walk unsteadily, supported by the nurse as she moved him about for the work of assistance, Ilario whispered to the assistant, "Is the medium conscious?" "While out of his body, yes, but he probably won't retain any memory once he returns." Ilario ventured further. "We can see that he is moving about in materialized garments, under the nurse's guidance. But under these conditions, could he put the work at risk if he harbored any inappropriate desires?" "Undoubtedly," replied Aulus. "He is under her control, but control doesn't mean nullification. Any improper impulse on his part would affect the work, hence the appropriateness of this type of activity without a lofty moral objective." Supported by the benevolent spirit, the healing medium reached the small living room, displaying the delicate garment similar to a moonlit tunic emitting a silvery light. But as he proceeded through the atmosphere reigning in the room, the clarity lessened until it nearly went out. At our questioning look, the assistant explained. The neuropsychic condition of the incarnates participating in the task does not help. They are absorbing our energies, but are not in any way contributing to replenishing the expenditure of fluids so painstakingly prepared. Alice invited us to enter the living room. In fact, continuous dark mental emissions were colliding with one another in a lamentable way. Our incarnate friends seemed like unconscionable children. Their thoughts were undesirable, expressing absurd requests in the apparent silence they were restlessly observing. They were requesting the presence of discarnate loved ones, without considering the appropriateness or their merit for it. They were criticizing this or that particularity of the phenomenon, or they were tying their imagination to debased tribulations of their everyday lives. The concourse of the good spirits was being received not as kindness from benefactors, but as frivolous spectacle to be carried out by mere servants. Even so, the workers from our plane were doing their best to ensure the success of the task. The devoted nurse assisted the sick by treating them with healing rays. Several times she left the room and then returned, since at the mere proximity of any inadequate thoughts that would come in contact with her vibrations, the ectoplasmic matter would feel the effects and would darken under the bombardment of the participants' thought forms. When the healing work was over, a cheerful friend from our plane took a small amount of the medium's materialized energy in his hands and left. A few moments later, he returned with some flowers, which were distributed to the incarnates to calm their excitable minds. Appeasing our curiosity, Alice explained, "This is an ordinary apportation, achieved with reduced aid of medianimic energies. Our friend here," he said as he pointed to the flower's emissary, "took just a tiny amount of ectoplasmic energy, forming only small, superficial crystallizations of the thumb and index finger of both hands, to pick the flowers and bring them to us." "It's interesting to note," said Hilario, "how easily ectoplasmic energy passes through dense matter. Utilizing it on his fingers, our colleague found no obstacle in passing through the wall." "Indeed," replied the assistant, "the element is extremely subtle. Adhering to our nature, it acquires a renewed dynamic character." "What if the medium himself were the object of the apportation? Would he be able to pass through the wall under the same circumstances?" "Undoubtedly, as long as he remained under our control and closely connected to our energies. There are technicians here who are skilled enough to dematerialize the physical elements and reconstruct them straight away, conscious of the responsibility they're undertaking." And smiling, he added, "You mustn't forget that the flowers passed through a masonry wall with such assistance. Likewise, if we found it useful, the medium could be apported outside just as easily. In any construction of the physical realm, the clusters of atoms are not solid fortresses, just as is the case in our own sphere of action. There is empty space in all formations, and through it the elements interpenetrate. The day will come when earthly science will be able to reintegrate the units and constitutions of atoms with the same assurance with which they are learning to disintegrate them." Immediately thereafter, our fellow spirit workers, always interested in awakening their incarnate brothers and sisters to the realities of the spirit, reconnected the medium to his physical body. The young man rubbed his face, half asleep. However, as a result of calming passes, he lapsed back into a deep hypnotic state. Revitalized and abundant ectoplasmic energies once more flowed from his nose and ears. Followed by us, some of our colleagues went into the adjoining room. There, on a small electric stove, a large pail of molten paraffin grabbed our attention. A spirit with a friendly demeanor covered his right hand with the malleable paste flowing abundantly from the medium and materialized his hand to perfection. He then immersed it in the superheated paraffin and left the precious mold of his hand as a memento for the meeting's participants. A young woman greeted us cordially and also worked the ectoplasm. She shaped 3 flowers, submerged them in the pail, and then laid them on the table for their participants as a kindly remembrance of that evening of tolerance and warmth. Other spirits, friends of the place, brought in several seashells, which emanated delicate fragrances that spread throughout the room in subtle waves. Noting that the spirit workers submitted the medium to complex magnetic procedures through which the materializing substance was returned to the physical body completely purified, we showered Alice with lots of questions. Do all incarnates actually possess the energy we were examining? Could we expect more manifestations of it in the future? Would this energy invariably have to be directed, or could it organize itself in certain circumstances? Alice left the closing phase of the endeavor to the other workers and explained. Ectoplasm is situated between dense and perispiritual matter. It is a product of the emanations of the soul through the filter of the body. It is a resource characteristic not only of human beings, but of all forms in nature. In certain special physiological organisms of the human race, it appears in greater amounts and in relative maturity for the manifestation needed for the physical effects we have analyzed. It is an amorphous element, but of great power and vitality. It can be compared to a genuine protoplasmic mass. It is extremely sensitive and animated by creative principles that function as conductors of electricity and magnetism. These principles are invariably subordinated to the thought and will of the medium who exteriorizes them, or the discarnate, or not, spirits who are attuned to the medium's mind, controlling his or her behavior. Infinitely pliable, it gives partial or complete form to the spirits who make themselves visible to the human eye or the camera. It gives consistency to wires, sticks, and other types of visible or invisible devices in the phenomena of levitation, and it substantiates the images created by the medium's imagination or the imagination of those who, mentally attuned, assist him or her. Thus, it demands a lot of attention and care on our part to keep it from being dominated by dark intelligences, since falling into the hands and being manipulated by spirits still captive to debased passions could cause serious disturbance. And indicating the medium, who was waking up drowsy, he continued, by polarizing the energies from our plane, the medium functions as a maternal entity from whose creative potential completely or partially materialized spirits draw the resources they need for their manifestations. In this way, they become his true offspring for a very short time. Taking in this concept, Ilario said enthusiastically, that would mean that in the generating forces exuded by the medium and by the co-workers from our sphere, we could also find the fundamental principles of human genetics in configurations that earthly science is not yet aware of. Yes, without question, confirmed the assistant. The principles are the same, although the aspects are different. The future reserves wonderful achievements in that regard. Let's continue to work and study. The time we had available had ended. Alice ended the remarkable conversation and invited us to leave.